Now, when the government takes the responsibility of administering one's several religion, these religious bureaucracies tend to be populated by groups of officials who are predominantly or exclusively from the Orthodox groups. Now, groups that are not part of this Orthodox majority may feel alienated and potentially be persecuted. Religions that are not, besides this, religions that are not incorporated into the government structure may face discrimination because they are seen as outsiders or as being in opposition to the government. Next, we also identify certain political factors that contribute to religious persecution and conflict. The first of this, which is extremely important and has been noted in many of the ASEAN countries, is the politicization of religion. Now, many of the country reports note the worrying trend of this politicization across ASEAN and highlight that this has led to an increase in religious persecution and conflict. In particular, this is extensively discussed in the context of Malaysia and Myanmar, and as well as Indonesia. What do we mean by politicization of religion? Well, we would think of religion as being politicized when it is invoked in political discourse for political aims. Now, unfortunately, the fact that religion is an important identity marker for peoples within ASEAN has allowed and facilitated politicians to exploit religion for their political goals. Some such politicians have found it expedient to invoke religion to either boost their own legitimacy or to undermine their political opponents. Another side effect of politicization is that politicians have also found it expedient or simply unviable to criticize religious extremists. Another factor is the de facto conflation of national identity with the majority of religion. Now, an assertion of a singular national identity can result in the marginalization and exclusion of minorities. It's also allowed for dominant majorities to demand restricting the rights of minorities, such as the banning of their religious texts, as has been highlighted in Malaysia, as well as in asserting certain laws have to be passed to preserve the national identity, which in effect preserves the privileges of the majority. In extreme circumstances, this conflation could lead to religious minorities mobilizing against the state, leading to religious conflict, and this has been the case in the Philippines and Thailand. Notably, Thailand's asserted foundational ideology of nation, religion, and king has always been understood to refer to Buddhism. Now, at the same time, the conflation of religion with national identity could also lead to assertions that those who are of a different religion are effectively outsiders in society as well as opponents of the state. This reports note accounts for poverty oppression against Muslim minorities in Myanmar as well as Christians in Laos and as noted in Cambodia. Now, while religion is often politicized for political gains, we do not want to underemphasize that some may feel the need, may proceed from a position that their actions are dictated and required under their version of what their religion requires. Now, this occurs when, in a sense, what we want to emphasize is that we do not want to underestimate the normative authority of religion. When certain elites or groups seek to respond to what they perceive to be these normative demands, and these normative demands may contain restrictive elements, this also could lead to religious persecution. In this regard, the report notes Brunei's Islamization policies, including the Sharia Penal Order 2013, could be seen as an attempt to fulfill the monarch's desire to fulfill his religious duty, although this is in a way that is undemocratic and which could lead to religious persecution of minorities and dissenters in the future. Another aspect that we have noted is the rule of law in transition. The strength or weakness of the rule of law in the country can also contribute to persecution and conflict. For instance, a weak state with a breakdown of the rule of law could open up space for religious extremism, especially when the government is not willing to prosecute those who commit acts of violence. One way in which this has occurred has been in the wake of democratization following a sustained period of authoritarianism. Although this is merely a temporary weakening of the rule of law, this has allowed extremists to exploit the emerging democratic space to spread and incite religious hatred. Then there has been certain observation that this weakness needs to be addressed while supporting democratization in the long run. For instance, states should support democratic and rights-promoting organizations while taking a strong stance against religious extremists and those inciting hatred against other religious groups, as would be required under Article 22. Now, decentralization is an aspect that we have observed across ASEAN. It generally limits state power because local communities are given greater scope to exercise political power and to govern themselves. However, it can be a double-edged sword, where human rights is not yet a strong foundation within the local communities, or where there is a lack of strong inter-religious consensus. In this regard, majoritarian local values may be invoked to restrict religious freedom, especially those of minority groups. Where the local authorities are unable to fulfill their duty to protect the rights of religious minorities, this can lead to persecution and outright sectarian conflict. And this unfortunate outcome of decentralization was noted particularly in the country reports in Indonesia and Laos. Certain social factors that we have noted. Now, contestations between religious majority and minority. As Ambassador Ong pointed out, ASEAN is a highly diverse, religiously diverse region, and pluralism actually exists to some extent within ASEAN countries. And this means that majority and minority dynamics could greatly affect the social and public order of these countries. The lack of minority protections could thereby lead to persecution and conflict, especially when dominant religious majorities seek to assert their superiority over minorities. It becomes especially problematic when they seek to employ state power to impose restrictions on minority groups. Now, these attempts to augment the position of the religious majority has been especially noted in the reports on Malaysia and Myanmar. On the other hand, we also want to note that the protection of freedom of thought, conscience, and religion for all can help to resolve tensions among diverse groupings by giving everyone, regardless of their religious background, greater assurance that their personal dignity will be protected. Another point we wanted to also highlight is the importance of grassroots mobilization, which could contribute positively or negatively to religious freedom. Now, grassroots groups could mobilize to incite and spread religious hatred, leading to increase in persecution and conflict, or it could be used to spread religious tolerance as well as cooperation. And this has been, both sides of this mobilization has been noted in several countries, including Myanmar and Malaysia. For instance, in Myanmar, democracy activists have launched a movement called Panzaga Flower Speech, which aims to educate people about the perils of hate speech and to convince them to support efforts to oppose groups and persons using hate speech. One should also note, as Ambassador Chavik noted, the role of moderate religious leaders and organizations in creating the right conditions for the protection of freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. where religious groups, leaders of religious groups endorse moderate religious views and are willing to share political, legal, and social space with other groups. This can lead to an increased level of religious freedom as well as a decreased level in persecution and conflict. Indeed, again, the Indonesian country report highlights the role of the largest and well-established Muslim organizations, Muhammadiyah, Nahdlatul Ulama, as key factors in promoting interreligious harmony and ensuring freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. In short, moderate religious leaders could be crucial in fostering interfaith dialogue as well as promoting understanding and cooperation. Now, I wanted to end the part on social factors with emphasis on religious nationalism. This is one factor that bears heavy emphasis in light of what's happening across ASEAN. What is religious nationalism? In the report, I've defined it as, and I borrowed this from an academic, a social movement that claims to speak in the name of the nation and defines the nation in terms of religion. What this means is that religious nationalists are those who invoke religious identity to mobilize followers to gain political support and inevitably oppose other religious groups. There is a tendency for religious nationalists to seek to align and sharpen boundaries of their religious political community against others, and this also tends to create a high level of political animosity to those perceived to be outside the nation. In other words, if you are a religious dissenter or someone who's not from the same religion, you are not just someone from another religion or a dissenter, you are also considered to be a national traitor, a traitor to the nation. Country reports note a significant rise in such religious nationalism across ASEAN, most notably in Malaysia and Myanmar. It's mentioned in Myanmar, the Mamata organization as Constituent Movement 969 have been asserting and spreading an aggressive form of Buddhist nationalism, and this includes demanding constricted laws against conversion to faith marriages, and in extreme circumstances have been found to be involved in inciting violence against religious minorities. Now, in ending this section, I also wanted to note that in many circumstances, these factors have led to persecution in the form of restrictive laws. So we're not just talking about random acts, we're also talking about laws that could lead to increase in persecution and conflict. And these are some of the restrictive laws that we have noted, regulations that tend to prioritize one religion, which at the same time has the unfortunate effect of marginalizing other religions. The second type of restrictive laws that we have noted tend to conflate state or national interests with that of one religion, and therefore the interests of other religious groups get either marginalized or these other religious groups tend to face restrictive conditions because they are not aligned with that one religion. There are also other regulations that subordinate religion to the national interest, so where religious practice is restricted on the basis of public order, national security, public morality, and so on. The fourth type that we have observed involve regulations that aggressively exclude religion because religion is seen as not a legitimate part of the public discourse. Going on, this study is premised on the idea that treatment of religious groups and the violations of religious freedom, especially religious persecution and conflict, have regional effect. They're not just matters that happen within national boundaries, but also matters that matter to other countries within the region, especially in light of the fact that ASEAN is moving towards greater integration. Now, Now, we want to highlight that co-religionist interests exist across ASEAN, and this could affect regional relations as well as impact conditions within neighboring countries. Now, one should note that many of the main religious faiths have co-religionists throughout ASEAN. What this means is that they may be majority in some countries but minorities in others. Now, religious persecution and conflict in one ASEAN state of one religious group could result in acts of retaliatory violence in another ASEAN state. This has fortunately not occurred as often, but there are notable instances of this, such as instances of violence occurring as a result of occurring in Kuala Lumpur as well as in Indonesia, or planned instance in Indonesia that was fought with respect to the treatment of the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar. Now, at the same time, and this has fortunately is not a common occurrence, is that states may also assert certain keen state interests when their co-religionists are persecuted in other ASEAN member states. Now, the treatment of minority faiths and groups should be seen as of particular importance to the effectiveness of ASEAN as a community builder. One positive example of this is where one country with a strong majority could assist another country in negotiating and in understanding the requirements of their minority groups. And one example the country report noted is the role of Muslim majority Malaysia in assisting the Philippines in negotiating the peace accord with the separatist movement in southern Philippines. One should also note that there are regional networks in place, and this regional networking could increase. This regional networking could result in the spread of religious ideologies that are moderate or extreme. In that sense, it could adversely or positively impact freedom of thought, conscience, or religion. Now, one should also note that human rights abuses in one ASEAN member state could also have the potential of destabilizing the region if left unchecked. One risk that has emerged has to do with Rohingya Muslims, refugees fleeing Myanmar and becoming refugees in Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Again, it bears emphasizing that the precise nature of the violence is not entirely clear, but the fact is that they are now refugees in neighboring countries. For instance, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees estimates that there are about 34,000, more than 34,000 Rohingya Muslims who are registered as refugees in Malaysia. While there are also thousands from the country who live illegally or are awaiting refugee status. And as I mentioned earlier, there has also been reported violence stemming from the conflict, such as a reported drive-by shooting in Kuala Lumpur in January 2014, and the follow-up planned attack to attack the Myanmar embassy in Jakarta in 2013, which appear to have some connection to the conflict. Now, it bears asking, what is ASEAN's role in all of this? Religious persecution, as we have defined, as serious violations of freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, clearly contradict the member states' commitments to religious freedom under Article 22 of the AHRD. Now, those who advocate religious persecution also often engage in incitement of hatred based on religion and belief. Continuing instances of such religious persecution and conflict unfortunately demonstrate that Article 22's injunction that all forms of intolerance, discrimination, and incitement of hatred based on religion and beliefs has not yet been realized. This is perhaps not entirely surprising since it is an ambitious goal, but it does mean that more has to be done to address normative and implementation gaps. Now, there is a limitation clause under Article 8. However, we would argue that persecution cannot be justified even under this limitation clause because it cannot be seen as a just requirement of national security, public order, public health, public safety, public morality, or the general welfare of the peoples in a democratic society. In fact, violence against a religious group could lead to a breakdown of public order and public safety, and as well as damage the general welfare of the people. One should also note the emphasis on democratic societies, which is premised on the political equality of all persons, which persecution should not have a place in. Furthermore, as we've noted, prioritization of state interests over rights should be reconsidered if ASEAN is seen to be taking human rights seriously. In this regard, Article 8 as well as Article 6 and 7 of the AHRD, ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, should be read restrictively so as not to vitiate the rights guaranteed under the Declaration. In this regard, ASEAN has a role in addressing normative and implementation gaps within the region as a regional group as well as within their respective countries. At the moment, we also recognize that the ASEAN Charter does not provide measures for intervention with regards to threats to or breach of the region's peace and security. The instruments do not prescribe authority to intervene in disputes or conflicts between member states or between member states and an external party. This is the current framework that we are working with. We just wanted to highlight that such a limitation in ASEAN's responsive capability could be reconsidered in light of the shift towards greater recognition and priority of human rights in the region, particularly where rights violations could lead to cross-border effects and destabilization in the form of breaches of peace and security. Let me conclude. In conclusion, this study has highlighted areas of concern where there are trends in religious persecution and conflicts across ASEAN, and they have been highlighted in order for greater governmental and regional responses to be made possible. It is hoped that this study will stimulate further discussion on how to expand the scope for multilateral cooperation. Indeed, we are of the opinion that it is in ASEAN's individual and collective interest and responsibility to address instances of religious conflict and persecution in a way that best promotes and protects freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, and that more religious freedom will not only result in less violent persecution and conflict, but also contribute to better overall outcomes, including economic growth and stability for ASEAN societies. In this regard, we have pointed out some good practices that ASEAN countries have engaged in that could reduce persecution and conflict. We've highlighted two here. These are one is government-mediated interfaith dialogue and good governance. The thinking behind good government-mediated interfaith dialogue is that when the government is involved and exercises even-handedness in dealing with all religious groups, this would be a crucial way to build trust between it and the religious groups, as well as among the groups themselves. Secondly, we emphasize the need for good governance, which obviates, among others, the need for politicization of religion, since politicians who govern well should be able to gain electoral support on the basis of their good governing record rather than have to invoke religion for their own political gains. Furthermore, a good government committed to protecting fundamental freedoms is theoretically less likely to engage in religious freedom, religious persecution, and conflict. In conclusion, let me bring us back to Article 22. The freedom of thought, conscience, and religion is a fundamental freedom that ASEAN member states have committed themselves individually and collectively to protect and promote. Violations of religious freedom have serious effects on the lives of individuals and groups. This study has sought to provide a hopefully valuable perspective by highlighting areas of concern as well as the impact on the regional peace and security. Not only does it hope to provide greater attention to such instances, it also hopes to stimulate increased efforts to address the factors that contribute to these instances. Lastly, let me just say that the protection of freedom, let me just emphasize once more, the protection of freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, as well as the promise to eliminate all forms of intolerance, discrimination, and incitement of hatred based on religion beliefs are crucial goals, and ASEAN would do well to realize its promise under Article 22, and this will further guarantee peace and security and foster integration in the region. Thank you.